Good one. Okay. All right. Now, I'm not going to kill you with PowerPoints, but I've got a couple of little slides to show you. So, impactful partnerships, that's what we're working on today. You like my picture there? Can everyone see the little deer and his little birdie? Yes? Yeah. So they are actually a mutualistic partnership. They benefit each other, those two. That's why I put them up there. So what I thought we might start with is, could we ask people to share what you think your most impactful partnership is? Any thoughts on that? Judith, perhaps could you give us some any partnerships that you've got? What partnerships do you really value in your organisation?
Well, we work closely with the majority of the service providers within our communities, but we're only a very small organisation. We've only got 5 staff.
Right.
And none of us are, well, only one of us are a full-time staff member at the moment. So we actually don't have any formal agreement in place. So I'm struggling a little bit with this standard.
Okay, fair enough.
We have our partnerships listed, and we do have informal meet and greets. So basically, because we're a small community in a small town, we all know one another. So if we get a new service, we reach out to other service providers. If they get a new service, they reach out to us. We have a one-on-one meeting, generally, informal morning tea. New service is explained to us and how we can work together and both benefit one another, what the referral processes are. We do, of course,
you've got some good practices in place, even though they're not formalized, right?
Yeah, they're not, not as formalized as what it would be if you were in like a much larger organization.
Totally. Yeah. And look, I would say that this is one of the standards where you probably get the most variety. Like, we get a huge amount of variety because organizations form different sorts of partnerships and at different levels of complexity. So there's lots of ways to interpret this standard, and that's like one of the points of having this session today. So we'll talk about that, because I think a lot of small organizations really struggle with what do you want me to tell you? I know everybody.
We're funded by the Department of Communities and Justice, so I'm guessing we're in partnership with them because we've got milestones and key performance indicators that we have to meet and target. So we monitor them, and there's monthly meetings with the hierarchy, with DCJ that management meet with.
So you've got sort of, that's kind of like a contractual partnership. And then you've got some other, like a lot of other partnerships that, if we're talking about impact, are probably really important to you because you are small with limited resources. The impact is significant because you're probably relying on those organisations to collaborate to give you good outcomes for your clients, because you just don't have the resources to do it all yourselves. Would that be a fair enough comment?
Yes, we have to outsource. We have very little brokerage. We're sort of like a fill the gap provider.
Right.
So we don't actually pay for accommodation. We help people to obtain accommodation. Help people to maintain their accommodation through heaps of different ways.
Yeah, so I think, look, Judith, I think thank you for that, because I think you've given us some like a couple of really different sorts of examples of partnerships and how it's impacted on you. So yeah, great. And we'll talk a little bit more about what evidence might be helpful to demonstrate that. Can I ask the Tea Tree Gully people, because like you're in a very different position, like you would have partnerships all over the place, I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, we
Yeah.
work in I guess similar areas. So um, Anne Marie is going to be looking after my role shortly, and the ACES accreditation, reaccreditation, and so that's why she's here today, which is fantastic because it's all about learning. And this is the first time, so we're about to go through ACES reaccreditation. So really wanting to understand this side of things.
Yeah.
We have community neighbourhood development funding through Department of Human Services in South
Right.
Australia. So we partnerships is a key part of that contractual partnership agreement that we have with them as our funding partner.
Yeah.
So similar to what Judith was saying, we have a lot of those informal conversations, but just because we're a bigger organisation, it doesn't mean we necessarily have a lot of the formalised partnerships. So I guess I'm talking from the area that I work in, which is community development and services through community centres. We're in the process of developing some formalised MOUs. We have different service providers that use our community centres for delivery of services, but we operate that on a fee waiver structure, and it's
Right.
not necessarily a formalised MOU partnership. It's more reviewed as a fee waiver or a fee reduction process, which is, there's a lot of governance around that because we're local government.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've got a range of different partnerships
Interesting.
from,
But
with food bank and referrals through to women's safety service and using our spaces to offer their services. But I think a lot of them are the informal in regards to getting to know what each other do. What do you do, what do we do, what are the gaps, how can we refer someone on to you. It's more relationship based partnerships that aren't necessarily documented.
Yeah, and I think like
Yeah.
some of those informal relationships, they're incredibly valuable. It can also be really quite tricky to navigate, I think, and yeah,
When there's
probably
for an organisation, then one thing that I'm learning is then if it's a relationship with someone in an organisation, but then if that person then changes positions or leaves, then that
yep,
kind of
start again.
past arrangement is like, oh, but
Yeah,
with this person, and then so that's where the formalisation can
exactly.
be of benefit. So we have experienced that and learned from that. So yeah.
Yeah, really good point. So yeah, even if it's not formalized, if it's documented, just if there's like a little history of, meeting minutes or something like that, it can be useful. Just
I
letting
just
someone
want to
else
add,
into the
well,
room.
yeah,
Hello, Karen. So yeah, look, I think that there's a really good range of different sorts of relationships, and look, we definitely see more informal than formal relationships put up as evidence in ACES accreditation. So, like, it's kind of what you'd expect. Most organisations, would probably have a few, at least one sort of leading, contract, a funding contract, and maybe a few funding contracts. But yeah, loads and loads of different levels of informal sorts of of partnerships that contribute to the delivery of their services. So, but it is a tricky one to try and evidence. And yeah, I think, probably the first thing to think about is like what level of partnership you've got with different organisations. So I'm just going to go back to screen share. Got a few resources to share with you at the end of the session, but let me just, so can't get to my screen. Okay, so I've got a paper for you with this, with more detail on this, but this little table shows a kind of different sorts of structures that you might set up or you might see in different organisations. So, and what are the pros and cons around those different types of structures? So, can you see in your own partnerships, can you see examples in there? So we have an informal network. We've kind of talked about that. So they're not legal. Everyone, like, the parties remain independent. You kind of spread the risk a little bit by sharing the risk, but they tend to be less coordinated.
I think it
there's
depends.
no ability to coordinate it, which is
I think it depends on the outputs and what you're trying to achieve. So we run a young parents network. Well, we don't run it. Another service runs it, but we're signed up to an MOU, which has a formal working agreement that we contribute staff and resources once a month to this collaborative sort of support for young parents in the community. And that's been operating for years and it works quite well. But then we've got other agencies that will have a chat at interagencies and say, oh, how about we do this for 16 days of action around domestic violence? And, we run a community event that's fairly sort of loosely organised via email and a commitment. So it depends on what
it's just it's for that year, right? So you just
one-off situation. But if you've got a vulnerable group that you need to provide consistent support to, like young parents or Aboriginal parents, you really need to have a strong working agreement with the services that participate.
Yeah.
So they all know what they're expected to contribute, and then it's written into people's job descriptions that their agency will participate in this particular activity, because you can't leave those families hanging.
Yeah. So I was going to talk about this later, but let's talk about it now. What would make you document a partnership as opposed to keeping it casual? Like, how do you decide?
Well, it's a partnership or it's a collaboration.
All right. Well, let's have a look at this this little list. So we've got a network. We've got a lead agency arrangement, which is contractual. So, if you're subcontracting to a lead agency, there's a constituted consortium where, two organisations might actually set up a new business. There's a partnership. So it's not binding, it's not constituted. And there's mergers where organisations actually, take over another organisation. So they're all different types of collaboration. And the ones we've talked about so far have been lead agency, informal network, and partnerships, I guess. So these are the things like, MOUs where, you can have something, but they're really not binding. It's an understanding. It's not a contract. So
Going off what Karen said, there's a lot of variables, isn't there? So is it a one-off? Is it ongoing? What are the stakes? So what's at stake if something goes wrong? What are the risks?
Exactly.
What's the value?
Yeah, Donna,
of,
that is
the
absolutely it.
Yeah.
It's based on risk. It has to be based on risk, why you would consider different sort of levels of tie-up with someone. So, as Karen says, for a communications program that's a one-off for the year, it's a few days of work. What's the risk around that? The risk might be that one of you does a bit more work than the other one, or, that it's not that successful. But, on the whole, it's probably not generating enough risk for you to go, oh, we need to formalize this. We have to put it all in writing. Okay. But if you're talking about, to use your example again, Karen, like where you're partnering with an organization to provide a parenting program and you've got clients that are dependent on you to provide a service, then if one or other of the partners lets down the side, then you really are in trouble. Like, you're actually not delivering your service anymore. So there's much more risk involved in something like that. So it's all entirely up to you to decide, but generally, thinking about what's the risk, what's at stake if this doesn't work, if if my understanding is different to somebody else's understanding of what this partnership offers, then those are the times where you really need to go, okay, you always need to talk about it, but there'll be times where you go, we need to formalize this as well. So, yeah, I think, there's a lot to consider in this. And I think a lot of organizations kind of fall into partnerships or they inherit them, and it all becomes a little bit fuzzy about, well, what do we do about this? But it doesn't mean that you can't pull it back and go, all right, we really want to reconsider this, what we're doing here, and talk to the people that you're partnered with in whatever way. So if we're talking about impactful partnerships, what makes them impactful? What are you looking for in a partnership with somebody?
The shared outcome.
Yeah, I think you've got an outcome that you're working towards, and they are symbiotic, or they are aligned with the services that are engaged. So, if everyone's trying to support young parents, we can't all do it alone, but if we work together, we can provide a consistent support to them.
Yeah, so a shared vision or a shared purpose is really critical to, otherwise, like, why are you in partnership with them? So, yeah, I think, and sometimes you might need to have a think about that. So, we see a lot of MOUs with housing organisations. So I kind of go, well, what's the shared vision there? Is it exactly the same? You kind of do need to come to something that's like, okay, we agree that this is what our partnership provides. So, you as a homelessness service person might be, wanting to, move people out of a refuge or something like that, but that's probably not their concern, So you need to find what the common goal is with you, with your potential partners, so that you can then track that and go, are we being successful with what we're setting out to achieve? Because otherwise you're kind of pulling in different directions, I suppose. So yeah, that shared purpose is really critical. What else? What else makes a good partnership?
Oh, I think it's all about good communication and making sure that you continue to stay on the same page.
Yeah.
So I think that's what happens over time, is people drift apart.
They drift, yeah.
Like a relationship can happen if you don't work on it. It doesn't work.
That's a good analogy there. Yeah. And as Donna said, particularly when the arrangements between organisations, but the representatives of those organisations change. So yeah, that ongoing review and communication is really important. Yeah. Anything else? Thoughts? What about what's in the agreement? The content of the agreement. Would it be important that both organisations, or maybe there's more than two, like all partners, contribute to that? So
I think you need to have, like in our MOUs, we document what each agency is bringing to the party, whether it's staff, resources, time, and then we also look at what are the data collection thing, because the data, we all have to collect data for our reportables, but are we counting the same people for the same outcome? That sort of thing has to be worked out as well.
Yeah, excellent point, Karen. Yeah, so yes, you do. You need to. You all need to do. You need to co-design it. Really, like you can't sort of have one party just slapping something in front of the other and going, here's our partnership agreement. You really need, you will get much better outcomes if you've, sat down, collaborated on what it looks like. And that information sharing thing is absolutely crucial. So, if you are required to share information or collect information, that you've got alignment between you, that you've actually sorted that out so that each party is getting what they need from it. And, it it is matching, you know, like you're not collecting different versions of the same information. The other thing that I've written in my little notes is that it's documented, but that doesn't necessarily mean an agreement. It can be just that ongoing record of what you're doing. So, and I think, you know, this might be something for you, Judith, where everybody knows everybody and there's a really healthy common understanding across the organisation, well, across the whole town of what people do. But even if it's just like, you know, minutes of a meeting or something like that, it can help keep things on track, particularly representatives of organisations change, as like happening at Tea Tree Gully, where, you know, Donna's about to move on, but you know, Anne-Marie stepping into her shoes can go, well, okay, you know, I can see, you know, what's happened for the last 6 months with these people because, you know, here's Donna's meeting minutes or, you know, Donna's notes or whatever it is. But yeah, there's a record somewhere of what's happening. Ours
can be a little bit even more informal. Like an example is one of our services, the particular staff member changed roles. So there was a new person that came into their role, and both of them came into the organisation to introduce the new person so that we were familiar with them, could put a face to the name.
Yep.
So, and that's not documented at all. It happens.
Yeah. And does that matter, like in terms of like what matters in those sort of partnership arrangements, those really informal partnership arrangements in your organisation, Judith? Like, does it matter that it transfers from one person to another, or like what's the crux of it?
It can, because that person is performing a particular role. So, for example, this person was working with the youth.
Mm-hmm.
So if we had to refer any young people to that particular service, that would be the person we'd be referring them to. So with them moving on to another role, it's another face that's filling the role.
So you'd want everyone in your organisation to know that?
Well, they wanted us to know.
Yeah. Okay, so they're the sort of things then that, well, how do you do that? It's just all face to face, is it?
Yeah, it's just pop in and meet the staff and say hi and just introduce themselves. So it's,
so look, you could still make notes. You could still have, you know, a shared file or something like that where, you know, it's no more than, you know, George and Mary dropped in today, Mary's taking over the youth work or something like that. It could still be like a running record of what's happening.
We do have a J book where we document things down, like where people come into the service. So would that be sufficient as evidence?
It's evidence. It's all evidence. So if it's accessible for everybody, you know, what as assessors, what we're interested in is, you know, how does that communication take place? And we know that sometimes the communication takes place informally, and that's fine. And, you know, generally it's robust. So, you know, it might be that some of your partnerships are not evidenced formally, you know, that it's kind of, you know, you might say, look, we've got a list of the organisations we partner with, but, you know, it all happens in meetings and, you know, chats and that sort of thing. We would corroborate that by interviewing your staff and saying, so tell us about this and tell us about that. So, you know, if it appears to be robust, you'd probably still be quite happy with that. But, you know, I would like to see a list or a register of some kind that says these are the organisations we collaborate with. And, you know, the other part of that is reviewing the partnership and what it brings to, you know, what it brings to your organisation. So it doesn't have to be a formal agreement. It doesn't even have to be like regular meeting minutes and all of that sort of thing. But, you know, having some level of documentation is backup for, you know, it tells us this is what this organisation is doing, and there's some rigor around that. So otherwise, you know, for us as assessors coming in, we're just going to see, well, there's a lot of talk that happens, and that's all really good. But, you know, can someone fall through the cracks, you know? And that's where I think, you know, that's the test for us is, again, like we look at the risk and go, well, what's the risk to this organisation, or what's the risk to the client in the way this partnership runs? So, you know, am I concerned as an assessor that this organisation could, you know, take the blame for something because they, you know, I don't know, emailed the wrong person or something like that, you know? So it's sort of, it is always based on what's the risk, and that's like very much the lens that we look at things when we're assessing and going, okay, that's a comfortable arrangement, you know, everybody understands it, the risk's really low, we're not concerned about that. But, you know, there might be another arrangement where you go, actually, like they're really actually putting their necks out here, you know, like, I don't know, an example might be things like, yeah, that's all right, call us after hours, you know, even though it's not really our job to do, you know, clinical care, like we'll still help you, you know, like we'll, you know, we can be online to, you know, give you advice. And you go, oh, that's like, if you're stepping outside of your remit and just trying to be really nice to people, you actually might be putting your organisation and your people at risk by doing that. So that's where, you know, you sort of go, all right, like we have to have some boundaries around, you know, this arrangement. So, you know, it's okay for everybody in, you know, all of our partners to ring us for, you know, for something, but it's not all right to ring us for, you know, clinical, you know, we're not clinical people, so don't ring us about that. Don't put clients in front of us to, you know, to sort out their mental health issues, that sort of thing.
So
does that make sense?
It does. So would referral processes cover some of that?
Sorry?
Referral processes?
Yeah. What do you mean? What's your question?
Well, to cover your butt and make sure that you're not stepping out.
Oh, yeah. I think, the situation I'm talking about is, you know, particularly that after hours or, you know, like right on closing time thing where people are sort of trying to get help, and there's a lot of very kind people that work in social services that will try and help, you know, and they'll go, you know, I know Judith's still in the office, I'll give her a call, you know, she'll help you. And, you know, it might not be a risk, but depending on what they're asking you to do, might be a risk. So they're the sort of things where you just want to be sure that, you know, those referral partners or other partners, they might not be formal referral partners, understand what the limits are. That's all. That's all I'm saying is like, we'd just be looking at the risk there. And, you know, if you've managed that risk, then we're happy. If you were going to formalise a partnership agreement, what would you put in it?
A time when it's going to be reviewed.
Yeah.
Like you don't want it to be going forever necessarily. But you know, you need to have a time to review it and discuss whether it's still working and that sort of stuff. And obviously the key things that you're trying to achieve would be part of it as well.
Yep. Okay. Yep. So definitely, so a time, like a sort of expiry date.
Yeah.
That says, okay, this partnership, like this MOU.
We'll review this after a certain amount of period of time. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I've got one in draft at the moment. Yeah, I've got one in draft at the moment, and I think I've like called it a review period. And that's, you know, when we actually go, okay, well, you know, what have the outcomes been? Has it worked? Yeah.
Okay.
Been trying to draft some MOUs at the moment. So, yeah, finding out what the best information to include is interesting because there's so many different templates out there. And within the organisation, I found dozens of different MOUs from different organisations for different things. And they all have different information in a different way. So
I think you just
if
need
someone
to.
has a great list, I would love to see it.
We've got a couple of. Well, I've got a template that we'll put up on the website for you today, and there's also a template in the BNG portal, which is pretty much the same information formatted in different ways. So, like most of them have pretty consistent content. They just have it, arranged in different ways. That's really up to you what works, like make sure you've got the essence of it right. How you actually arrange it is probably neither here nor there, so but yeah, like have a bit of a checklist of the sort of things that you want to include in it, make sure you've got them in there. So yeah, like one thing is, when does this expire? And depending on the arrangement, like some of them, like I imagine yours in Tea Tree Gully, you might not see those organisations from the start of your MOU to the finish, like they might just be, if it's a room hire or something like that, I'm not sure. And then other ones you're sort of trying for sort of joint outcomes all the time, and you might be reviewing them routinely. So you might have interim meetings all along the way. So yeah, it depends on the partnership. So think about that too. So not just, okay, so we'll do this for 2 years and not talk about it, and then we'll come back together and see if it works. Yeah, sometimes that might be sufficient, for really simple things. But yeah, if you've actually got sort of client-based outcomes and things that you're trying to achieve, like the example that Karen gave, you probably would want to be reviewing that on a regular basis with your partners to say, all right, how are we tracking, and is it all working, and is everybody bringing to the party what they said they would bring to the party? So just depends again. So it can be trickier than you think, I suppose, in some cases. What other things would you put in there? And look, keep in mind that we are sort of talking about, perhaps something along the lines of what Karen mentioned, of like a joint program delivery we're talking about. So, there's risk involved, there's, performance measures. As Karen said, she would, want it written into people's job descriptions. So this is a fairly high level partnership arrangement. What else would you put in that arrangement? What'd you put in it, Karen? Oh, you're on mute.
We identified the parties. We talked about the commitment. So it's once a month from each agency to supply one worker to the program for the session that's delivered, the 2-hour session, plus a setup and a breakdown of the room. We talked about the shared outcomes. So ours is around improving parenting capacity. Other people had, supporting young adults. Community health and other partners have had different people participating. We talked about the position being part of the role rather than the person. So rather than identifying people, it was the community nurse, the family worker from us, the sort of thing. So it belonged to the position, not the actual person.
Yeah.
We had, if there was a financial contribution, we identified what that would be annually, and then the period of review, as somebody else said.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Okay. The other things I've got on my list is, how do you review it? So like, you might even go, the parties are going to meet monthly, or, it'll be, everyone fills out a form, like, we agree to fill out a template or something like that. I guess the risk management side of it, if there's risks, who's wearing that risk. So, who's responsible? I think, you kind of mentioned it, Karen, like, who's responsible for setup and breakdown, you know, I don't know if you've got families attending, who's responsible for first aid, you know.
Yeah, and child protection as well, because that can be tricky.
Yeah.
Who like if it's a client that is a client of your service, then you take the responsibility for reporting any child protection concerns.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Okay. And
The other thing, sorry,
might
would
be,
you?
in some cases, information sharing. So, you know, if you're actually particularly sharing client information, that's like those lines are really clear. That, you know, clients are giving consent and both parties understand, you know, what the limits of that consent is. So, you know, they need to be considered in your, you know, under your sort of privacy protocols for the organisation. Okay.
I was just going to add something else, Kay.
Yeah.
What about like conflict resolution, like about if there's a problem?
Oh, that's a brilliant one.
Is that
Yeah.
what you, I mean, you don't want to obviously put a downer on the whole thing, but a process around how we'll notify each other and deal with conflict? Is that?
And escalation, even if it's really bad, you know. So, you know, you might say that the CEOs are going to, you know, if there's conflict at a lower level of management, it'll be raised with the CEOs or something like that. Yeah, that's a really good one.
Is that? I mean, that'd be more when you've got a larger, higher risk, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah. I mean, you don't want to overcook it, you know, like, you know, for the sort of partnership arrangements that Judith's working with, like that would just be really uncomfortable for everybody and ridiculous. So, you know, you don't want to have to do that. But yes, like, you know, where there's risk involved, where there's, you know,
financial contribution, I'd imagine where it's quite high.
Yeah. And you might also want exit clauses as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, if like, you know, notice periods, that sort of thing, like you would in a contract. So, you know, like, because that's a risk, you know, like for Karen doing a joint delivery of a program and somebody goes, we don't want to play anymore, then she's got to provide staff, or she's got to go and find somebody else to partner with really quickly to be able to sustain that service. So yeah, you might want a notice period or something like that. Having said that, unless it's contractual, you can't really hold them to it, but it's a measure of commitment, you know, to the process. If people are willing to, you know, engage in developing an MOU and sign up for it, would generally mean that they're committed to keeping it. So, yeah. Okay. How are we going for time? I've got 15 minutes. Let me just screen share again. I don't want to lost my spot. There it is. Something going clunky with this. Right. Common gaps. So these are the things that, as assessors, that we often find missing. Any kind of documentation. So I think this is what you're struggling with, Judith, is that, you know, a lot of small organisations will say, well, we don't have any MOUs, we don't have formal contracts with anyone, so we don't know what to give you in evidence. And that's where a little bit of a documentation can go a long way. So I would definitely say have a register. So just a list, you know, who the organisation is, what you collaborate with them on. So like it can be they refer people to us for X, you know, like it doesn't have to be anything cleverer than that. You know, whether there's an actual agreement in place or not. And you can add the bits that suit you there. So, you know, who the contact is, you know, how frequently you go back and look at it, all of those things are up to you. So, you know, make it usable for yourself, but that can be a really useful piece of documentation. It's a good piece of evidence. It's a really useful tracking tool for yourselves. So consider that. Reviews are often missing. So, we see a dog-eared MOU that's like about 5 years old, and that's all there is. So, I'd say, if you're signing up to an MOU with an organisation, you should have a file on it, and you should have some more documentation on top of that. So you should at least have an annual review, which could be just an email that says it's all going great, it's working for both, whatever, but there's still some documentation there. So, I think, as you said, Matthew, those, endless agreements that are never checked on for health or anything like that, we do see those. And I think, people are going, oh, got to fish out something for the ASIS, inspection. So where's that old MOU that we had 100 years ago? So we're still working with those people. Let's put that one in. So I think, it's a gap. If I see an MOU that's dated, 2017, my first question is this still running? Like, it's got no end date. What's happening? So it doesn't stack up as a great piece of evidence unless there's a bit more to back it up. Trackability. So, what are you doing? So, and that's where I said, Judith, you're you're running book on what you're doing with those people can be part of your trackability of your agreements, your arrangements with organisations. It could be an email trail. Could be just like a little shared note that you keep on the organisation, or it might be a formal framework that you've got. You might have, a form that you've set up that, you routinely go through and write stuff up on. So, but some kind of tracking of what's going on with that arrangement is a useful thing. Formalisation. So, and what I would say here is sometimes there's an opportunity loss. So I think sometimes we see informal arrangements that are working fine, but, if they actually sat down and talked together, they might actually cook up something way better. So sometimes it's like, we're too busy. We're just busy. So we refer to each other. But, sometimes there's sort of underlying ideas cooking amongst the staff of things that they could work with another person in an organisation, or they start doing it. They just start doing stuff with them and nothing's formalised, which, in some ways can be really nice, but in other ways you go, it would actually be really good if it was just, written down as here's what we run together. Because, as you said, Karen, if it's the person and not the organisation, then if that person goes, does the whole thing fall apart? So, so sometimes, there's little things, sometimes they're like relatively small in the scheme of things, but they're really fruitful, like they're really good things for the organisation. But they're not formalised in any way. So there's not a procedure, there's not an instruction book or anything that says this is how we do it. And then, someone goes and it's all gone, which is really sad. So, I think, sometimes making a little partnership making it documented and a bit more official can have some real benefits to the organisation. And sometimes there's informal partnerships happening that really should be formal. There's risk and they haven't been formalised, and that's a worry. And that, if we spot those things, we would call them out and go, you actually should be setting this up as a formal arrangement. You're sharing a financial risk here and you have nothing around it. So, that's a risk for your organisation. And the other gap that we might see is understanding of the informal partnership. So, different people within the organisation and across the two partners or multiple partners actually have a different understanding of what that partnership is or what it's meant to achieve. And that would be a bit of a concern. So again, that sort of, you know, even if it's a very simple instruction sheet or something like that, gives it sufficient, you know, underpinning that everybody should understand what you're doing it for. So there's some of the common gaps that we see. And the next thing is about best practice. So having a register is a really good idea, as I said. So I'd really strongly recommend you consider having a partnerships register. Regular review. Now, review is a really interesting topic. So as we said, you know, it might be that you only review it at the end of that period of, you know, if you've got an MOU or something that's relatively low risk, you might go, okay, we'll just review that when it runs out in 2 years or a year or something. I would recommend that you put those review periods in a compliance calendar or something so you don't forget. So otherwise, where are you going to do that? I mean, you could, if you've got your partnership register, you could try and make that part of your regular practice to go back and look at the partnership register on a regular basis, or you could just wrap it into a program of, you know, your policy reviews and your compliance checks that you're doing and that sort of thing. So you could just whack it in there as another item that you need to do. When's the other time that you would consider doing review of partnership?
When there's significant change. Like
significant change, yeah.
Something happens that changes the way you're going to operate, maybe.
Yeah. So to either organisation or funding framework, or
it might be the organisation's changed priorities, or So really,
when do we know organisations have changed priorities?
We often know ourselves.
They drop off the radar. They stop coming.
Stop replying. Someone would say in their planning processes.
They stop replying to emails.
They do stop replying to emails. Yeah. So yes, you might need to instigate an emergency review if you don't hear from them. But part of your review processes should be like as part of your planning. So, you know, that should be one of the things that you review when you do your strategic planning is who are all our partners? Are they still supporting our goals? You know, are we still aligned? And are they the best partners for you? You know, so are we doing something new and do we need new partners, or do we need to, you know, divorce some partners because they're not helpful any longer, or we're not doing that? So, you know, if at no other time, you really should be reviewing your partnerships as part of your strategic planning cycle. What else we got? Oh, there it goes. Incorporate into planning. Consistency. So yeah, have a checklist, you know. What are the things that we, you know, do with each, particularly if you're, you know, doing MOUs, as we're talking about with Donna, have a bit of a checklist of things that need to go in there. So, and, you know, you could make that part of your partnership register. You could have those as columns across. So, you know, your checklist might always have, you know, your expiry date and your review period and your contact person, and they could all be things that go into your register as well. So don't have to, but I'm just saying, you know, try and be consistent about how you set up these things, because it will just be much easier for you. It'll become a habit. Be mindful of shared purpose, as I said. Like, make sure that you've actually found the thing that is the crossover for both of you, so that you're not pulling in different directions on any partnerships that you've got with people. That, you know, it's this is what we're looking for. Here's the measures, you know, this is like, we're looking at our shared effectiveness here. So yeah, make sure that that purpose is written into your agreement if you're writing it down. And consider risk. That's really important. How long we got left? Not much time. Let's have a quick look at the standards, and I've just highlighted all the things that we've talked about. So there's only 4 indicators here, but these are the things that you're looking for, that your objectives are agreed with your key partners. Now, for you, Judith, that might only be your funding agreement where you actually have that level of formality, but that's fine. But there's some really good examples down here of what you might use. Lease agreements are really common. So lots of people are leasing properties, that's a partner. And then, yeah, some of your MOUs, which a lot of people have. The need for protocols, performance measures, and reporting requirements. So, you know, these things have to be, if you're going to have an arrangement with someone, you need to know how you're measuring your effectiveness and how you're going to report it to each other and to your stakeholders. And that includes, you know, the same baselines, Karen. So that, yeah. Regular review and communication, really important. So we're looking for those things. So
could I just go back to number 1, the lease agreement? Do you mean the actual property that we lease here to run our business out of?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So yeah, you should have, like, you'll definitely have, you know, a breaking, you know, you'll have a lease agreement, it will have an exit clause, it'll have review periods, it's got all of those things in there. So yeah, that's definitely one of the things. And for Tea Tree Gully, it might be the other way around. You might be leasing properties or short-term lets and things like that. So, you know, you might be the holder of that agreement and putting it in place with other people. Okay, and one more indicator is the planning cycle. So this is not a really big standard, but it's a really important one. And yeah, always wrapping it back into your planning and considering how important your partners are to delivering the organisational outcomes that you're trying to achieve means that you have to include them in the planning cycle. And that might be your review of them, but it might also be their review of you. And like, you know, that we come out and ask for some partners because we want to talk to them. It would be really great if you've talked to them first, or if you talk to them on a regular basis, not if you talk to them just before us, but that, you know, that sort of constant contact with them and feedback, and asking them for feedback on, you know, how are our arrangements working? You know, are you happy with how it all works? Is it achieving what you want out of this? That sort of thing. So yeah, like getting their input into the planning cycle is important. The other element of that is not just their satisfaction with you, but what are their sort of longer term plans, and how do they see the sector that you're working in? Because they might have some really useful intel or a different perspective on it that's really helpful to you. So, you know, sharing your, even with very informal partners, as you have, Judith, that shared understanding of this is where we're all headed and this is the landscape we're working in, can actually be really helpful for you in developing your strategic plan. So, you know, if you know that one of the organisations that you work with closely is aiming to expand or apply for a different grant or something like that, that might change the way that you consider working with them, might give you some great opportunities to, you know, join in with them. So if you're finding that out as part of your feedback for your planning cycle, it'll be really, you know, it could be really helpful. I'm not saying it will be, but it could be really helpful. So I better wrap up. Resources. I'll post these on the website in a few days. There's a paper on community collaboration structures. So that's that first grid that I gave you in a lot more detail. There's a paper on what is an MOU and a template MOU from Justice Connect, the legal people. There's also a template MOU on the BNG portal. And there's quite a detailed document called the Vic Health Partnerships tool. And this is a whole thing that Vic Health have instituted over the last 10 plus years. But it's a whole thing about, you know, what you should be considering in a partnership. It's quite complex and in-depth, but it has a checklist at the end of it that's really quite insightful, I think. So, you know, it would be a really good thing to do, particularly if you were considering entering into, you know, a constituted agreement with somebody. You definitely want to use something like that. So that's there for you. And the BNG portal. So if you go to the reading room and search on partnerships, you'll get these hits. I'm not sure if you can see that, but there's a few pieces of information. There's a couple of templates and the evidence guides in there as well. So like there's a bit of useful reading in that too. So I think, you know, if you get through that, you'll see the themes coming up. But, you know, I think as far as evidence goes, like just think about what you do, how you do it, and how you can tell us about it. So, you know, it might be just a really simple note, and that might be sufficient, or it might be a full-on contract, and that will be great too. So it's kind of all proportional. I probably should exit. Has anybody got any questions, anything that they want to comment on? Are we all good?
I have a question for you, Kay, but I think I'll take it offline because it was about something different.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll stop recording and you can stay on the line if you like, Karen.
Oh, I've actually got to go.
Oh,
but,
okay. All right.
That's why I said I'll take it. I'll drop you an email. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Look, thank you everybody for joining us. It's been a pleasure seeing your faces. So nice to see people from Tea Tree Gully.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
And yeah, look, wishing you all the best. Those of you that are still yet to do their assessments.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.